Hello fellow sim racers. It's been quite a while since I last made a video about a specific build for Assetto Corsa Competizione. The reason for this is quite simple. The improvements and modifications that have been made since version 1.0, while useful, aren't really interesting enough to be the subject of a video in their own right. And moreover, they're not really very visually interesting. But version 1.0.7, and specifically the new tyre collision detection model, has just entered the public beta stage, and in my opinion, it's more than interesting enough to warrant a dedicated video. I've been on the record praising the tyre and suspension feel in ACC from day one, often at odds with some other commentators on the subject. For me, in almost every conceivable way, the information provided through to the wheel was a marked improvement over Assetto Corsa. One area that felt very similar to the predecessor, however, was the car behaviour over curbs, something which many members of the community have been highlighting for years. So, with the marked improvement in every other area, and the increased sophistication in modelling tyre flex, perhaps it was inevitable that the limitations of on-curve behaviour in ACC were going to become quite a hot topic. As many of you will know from Aris's excellent blog on the subject, Assetto Corsa and ACC used a single point of reference for measuring how the tyres interface with bumps. Or, to be more specific, the tyre collision detection with reference to the road mesh was sampled from one point in the centre of the tyre. As an aside, this shouldn't be confused with the modelling of the content patch as it relates to grip, which is dynamic. The reason for this single collision point is simply due to the resource overhead required to calculate the reference of the tyre to the track at the high frequencies required to produce reliable results. And before I move on, from what I understand, it's not just Assetto Corsa that took this approach. For the majority of situations, this single point sampling is more than sufficient, but under certain circumstances the limitations of the system are exposed. This includes pretty much any situation where the edge of the tyre meets a steep bump at an oblique angle, such as on sausage curbs, the edge of more conventional curbs, and some of the more steeply profiled curbs, like the one on the inside of Druids, for example. There's a lot of complexity to how this behaviour plays out within the tyre flex modelling, which I won't even attempt to explain here. If you want to get into the grubby details, then I've included a link to Aris's technical blog in the video description. It's definitely worth a read if you're interested in learning more about the technical side of tyre modelling in racing sims. The solution then was to add more collision detection points to the tyre model. On the face of it, this sounds simple, but doing so while maintaining reasonable CPU performance was a little more complex from what I understand. I was lucky enough to get a preview of build 1.0.7 at Spa, and the improvement in car dynamics in extreme load situations was immediately noticeable. Moreover, the feedback from the pro drivers was universally positive. So then, I was pretty keen to get my hands on the beta version of the build when it was made available to the public last week. So then, what's the crack? First up, as you would expect, the on-curb behaviour, as well as the transitions between the track and curbs, are like night and day. In the past, there were certain areas that you would have to avoid, or risk that sort of 1 in 20 chance of bizarre car behaviour. But now you can pretty much monster any curb that a real car would, which, realistically speaking, is what we're all aiming for here. Not only does the car behave more appropriately in these situations, but the force feedback feels more progressive over the bumps. This feels fantastic on a direct drive wheel, but I suspect those with gear and belt-driven equipment may need to make some tweaks to retain the same feeling of impact over the bumps, if that's what you desire. So far, so good, but it's not just the curb of death situations that are improved. Mid-corner bumps are much less likely to produce odd car behaviour now, which again is a pretty big deal. Another unexpected bonus is the impact that this change has had on certain cars. I really grew to dislike driving the 911 GT3 at certain tracks, as I've never really managed to get comfortable with the edgy feel over some of the very important curbs and the knife edge handling in some of the corners. But the changes in 1.0.7 have made a marked improvement, and all of a sudden the Porsche is a much more attractive proposition for me. One potential negative, if you can call it that, is that in some situations it feels a little like some of the cars slide a little more freely once they're over the grip limit. This may be down to using old setups, or honestly could just be a consequence of taking more curb, and perhaps it's just that good old placebo effect. Whatever the case, I'd take this with a pinch of salt and see for yourself. Build 1.0.7 has a lot more going on besides the collision detection improvements. Track IR implementation will be pleasing to a certain section of the community, as will the improvements to the traction control system, which feels much more usable in the cars I've tested. The settings feel a lot more progressive and there's a much larger usable range. But that's not really the focus of the video. The updated tyre model is a breath of fresh air, and for me at least has really helped address a rare weakness in the otherwise impressive driving model. So, all things considered, 1.0.7 is a nice step forward. And on a personal note, I'm looking forward to seeing how the pro drivers in the SRO esports series adapt to the more forgiving curb behaviour at the Nürburgring at the end of the month. Speaking of which, if you're going to be at the Nürburgring for Sim Racing Expo, please come over to the SRO esports arena and say hi. So that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this in the future. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.